My wife said she was going to a romantic dinner at her boss's house, and when I asked if it was work-related or something more intimate, she hesitated. Her silence screamed louder than any answer. I looked her in the eyes and said, "I hope you enjoy it, because it will be your last dinner as my wife." I turned my back and closed the door with the weight of someone who had truly loved, with the weight of someone who had lost not only his wife, but faith in everything he had built. She still tried to catch up with me, stammering justifications that seemed to have been rehearsed days before, but I was already tired of playing the role of the understanding man while being reduced to an extra in the plot she was secretly writing. The truth is, when you truly love someone, you trust them. You believe in the sincere good morning, the light smile at the end of the day, the natural touch during coffee in the kitchen. And that's exactly what destroyed me, the way she pretended to love me while everything crumbled inside. She betrayed me with her gaze, with her phone face down, with the repeated excuses about meetings that lasted until late. I didn't lose my wife when she cheated on me. I lost her when I realized that love was no longer a refuge, it was a theater. And there I was, playing a role I didn't write, trapped in a script she rewrote while smiling with a stranger. People think the end of a marriage happens suddenly. That there's an explosion, an epic fight, a scandal. But no. The end arrives like a whisper. An empty look at breakfast. A kiss that no longer fits. A mechanical touch at bedtime. I saw it all happening, but I preferred to cling to the hope that it was just a phase. That work was consuming her. That it was exhaustion. That it was longing for youth. That it was anything but what it truly was, lack of love. She distanced herself and I moved closer. She lied and I forgave. She disappeared and I waited. Until the day it no longer fit. Until the day his scent lingered on her neck. Until the day her laughter was no longer for me. And, when I finally understood, she was no longer my wife. She was just the woman I once called mine. The most ironic thing is that I would have forgiven her if she had looked me in the eyes and told the truth. If she had had the courage to admit what she did, what she felt, what was missing. But she wanted to keep both worlds. The comfort of my love and the ecstasy of novelty. The embrace of home and the adrenaline of betrayal. And that's where the worst pain lies, knowing that you were kept not out of love, but out of convenience. I was her emotional security. And when I realized that, it was as if the ground had been ripped from under my feet. I didn't cry at that moment. I just closed the door. From the inside out. And I felt that something inside me also closed with her on the other side. Her last attempt to explain was nothing more than noise in my head. Empty words spoken by someone who chose to destroy something I cared for as part of my own body. She thought he was the prize. She thought freedom would come in the form of candlelit dinners and spicy lunchtime messages. She thought the sparkle in his eyes was love, when it was just a massaged ego. It didn't take long for the lover to show who he really was. He didn't take her out to dinner for real, nor introduce her to friends, nor share plans. He used her as a pastime. As a distraction. As an object of desire, not of love. And when she wanted to demand feelings, she was discarded like something expired. The emptiness she left became the hole she herself fell into. And then she came back. She came back with downcast eyes, a dejected face, and a speech about longing, mistakes, and regret. But it was too late. Much too late. Her longing knocked on the wrong door. The man she left behind no longer existed. I learned that whoever loves alone carries the weight of both on their shoulders. And I grew tired of carrying it. When she reappeared, I had already rebuilt myself. It took time. I had silent nights, cold mornings, days when her scent still lingered on the pillow. But I washed away each memory with time. And on one of those days when the pain feels like it's going to swallow you whole, I found someone. Someone who didn't ask for space, they offered theirs. Who didn't want to know about my past, they wanted to build a present. And who didn't make me feel lucky to have love, they made me understand that I deserved it. It was this calm, deep, and true love that taught me the value of loyalty and shared peace. And when the betrayal hurt less, I realized it wasn't her I missed. It was the illusion of love I was carrying. She came back begging, crying, saying that now she understood. That now she knew what she had lost. But time had already done its work. I no longer felt anger, nor love, nor pity. Only forgiveness remained. And I gave it not for her, but for myself. Because living with resentment is remaining trapped in the other person's mistake. And I wanted to be free. Free from the pain, from the memory, and especially from her. So I forgave. And I saw in her eyes the panic of someone who wasn't prepared to lose. Because betrayal, for the one who commits it, always seems like a game with a way back. But sometimes, there is no way back. And she no longer existed for me. Life has a curious way of showing that love, when mistreated, doesn't die, it transforms. And what was love became the past. What was home became a memory. What was a foundation became ruins. And yet, I walked over the rubble and found a new path. Today, we are two strangers who once loved each other. She carries the pain of someone who destroyed something unique. I, the lightness of someone who freed themselves from what no longer existed. But there is one night. Just one. When everything almost came back. A night when she saw me. When I was with another. And the place was exactly the same where we used to celebrate our love. It was there, that night, that she cried silently, seeing that the songs that were once only ours were being played for another woman. That woman who now smiles with her eyes, as she did, before forgetting who she was. And that's where the real story begins. Because love may end, but what it leaves behind after it dies, is what truly transforms a life. And that night, something happened. Something no one expected. Not her. Not me. And perhaps, not even the person beside me. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is not entertainment, this is a lesson. No form of infidelity is romanticized or justified. The stories you're about to hear are fiction, but based on real pain, because there is only one truth: betrayal destroys homes, destroys lives, destroys love. Now, take a deep breath. Prepare to dive into an intense narrative, full of twists and turns, profound emotions, and an ending that will leave you speechless. Are you ready? Because what comes next, it's simply shocking. They met on an ordinary afternoon, over a hot coffee and a conversation about books, as if life had placed a discreet but unerring sign that their story had to begin there. His name was Daniel. Hers, Emma. And there was nothing spectacular about their first exchange of glances, except for the comfortable silence that settled between them, as if their presence filled the room with something that needed no explanation. The connection was natural, almost naive, from a time when love didn't come with a manual, only with a genuine desire to remain. Emma carried a beautiful restlessness in her eyes, a yearning to live more than routines dictated, and Daniel, on the other hand, possessed a rare serenity, a type of man who didn't talk much, but said everything in the way he looked, listened, and touched. Their relationship grew slowly, at the right pace for things that truly matter. As the months passed, they built rituals that weren't in romantic movies, but were precious in their own way. The mornings shared in silence, the impromptu dinners to the sound of their favorite songs, the little surprises left on the pillow. There was no ostentation, no grand promises. There was constancy. And that was all. Daniel loved the way Emma danced absent-mindedly while cooking, how she lost track of time tending to her plants, how she smiled slightly when she wanted to hide her tears. Emma, in turn, loved the care with which Daniel folded his t-shirts, the way he listened to her without rushing, how he always seemed to know what she needed without her having to say it. They married 2 years after their first meeting, in a small ceremony with close friends, laughter, and an exchange of vows that moved even those who swore they no longer believed in love. They built a simple house in a quiet neighborhood, with large windows that let in the morning sun and a hammock on the porch where they spent hours simply existing side by side. He worked as a literature professor, she as an administrative assistant in a company that was growing slowly but promised stability. They were never driven by excessive ambition, but rather by a mutual desire to live in peace, to create a secure routine where they both felt seen, loved, and respected. During the first few years, everything seemed perfect. There was complicity in the glances exchanged even in silence, understanding in gestures, and patience in their differences. They argued sometimes, like any couple, but they never stopped sleeping together, even on the most tense days. Daniel believed that love was a daily choice, a continuous effort, and Emma said that the lightness of living beside him was what made her wake up wanting to keep trying. Their friends admired them. They were seen as the couple who managed to maintain their passion even after time had dimmed its initial glow. Their photos were everywhere, in picture frames, on social media, memories printed on papers hanging on the refrigerator. To those looking from the outside, everything was an example of partnership, of balance, of true affection. Emma began to grow within the company. Her responsibilities increased, her hours became more unstable, and meetings extended beyond working hours. Daniel, always patient, understood. He made dinner, prepared her coffee, and sought ways to ease her routine when he noticed the tiredness in her eyes. He never complained about her absences, her lateness, or her broken promises to return early. He simply smiled and said she was building something important. Deep down, he knew that the outside world was more demanding of women, and he was proud of Emma's strength, her ability to adapt, to evolve. What he didn't realize was that, little by little, the distance between them was growing. Conversations began to happen more through messages than sitting at the table. Sunday lunches, once sacred, were being replaced by last-minute commitments, and the time together, once a desire, became a schedule. He remained there, waiting, believing, caring, but he sensed that something subtle was changing. The hugs were shorter, the kisses quicker, the eyes more distant. She said it was just a phase, that everything would soon be all right, and he wanted to believe it. Because loving is also about persisting. But there were nights when he sat alone on the balcony, looking at the sky, trying to understand at what point the two of them, so united, began to follow different rhythms. Emma, for her part, felt suffocated without knowing why. It wasn't a lack of love, at least not at that moment. It was a restlessness that grew silently, a desire to rediscover herself, to experience something new, even if she didn't know exactly what. Work began to occupy not only her time, but her mind, her emotions. The professional novelties gave her a sense of accomplishment, of autonomy, which contrasted with the emotional stability she had at home. And it was in this contrast that she began to lose herself. The days became divided between euphoria and guilt, between responsibilities and fantasies, between who she was with Daniel and who she wanted to feel again somewhere she didn't even know where. Nothing was said aloud. Neither of them wanted to be the first to admit they were drifting apart. Daniel continued investing in small gestures, in affectionate notes, in invitations for short trips, while Emma smiled back, but with increasingly distant eyes. They still touched each other, still laughed occasionally, still pretended everything was all right, but they knew there was something between them that hadn't existed before. A space, a hesitation, a lack of harmony that had once been natural. And it is at this point that many stories break down, not because of what happens, but because of what fails to happen. Because of the silence. Because of the omission. Because of the lack of courage to say that love, sometimes, needs attention to stay alive. There was one particular day that Daniel never forgot. It was an ordinary Saturday, mild weather, coffee in his favorite mug, and soft music in the living room. He was making pancakes while she fiddled with her phone, frowning. Instead of commenting on something trivial or sharing some silly news as they always did, she said she had to go out for a business dinner that night. The way she said it was different. An extra pause, a glance that wandered before the end of the sentence, a tone that tried to sound natural but carried something unspoken. Daniel simply nodded, without protesting. He just observed. And felt. He felt the emptiness that starts small but already announces itself as a storm. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. He preferred to keep that feeling to himself. She went out that night, as she said she would, and he stayed home, alone with his thoughts, certain that there was something in the air that wasn't love anymore. Not like before. And even with a heavy heart, he still believed they could find their way back. He still thought that all it took was talking, reconnecting, remembering the beginning. But sometimes, love doesn't disappear all at once, it dissolves, drop by drop, until when you realize it, you're already empty. What Daniel didn't yet know was that that night would be the first chapter of a new version of the life he thought he knew so well. A life he had built with patience, with dedication, with truth. And that would begin to crumble from within, silently, like someone collapsing in silence so that no one would see. Emma didn't yet know, but the emptiness she sought to fill outside her home would lead her to a place where regret would be her only faithful companion. At that moment, however, everything seemed just part of a phase, a curve that would soon straighten out. What neither of them understood was that certain oversights don't come back. That love, when wounded in the wrong way, doesn't scream, it falls silent. And when it falls silent for too long, it dies. And before they knew it, what was once home would become just a memory. But there was still a timid hope in the air. A breath before the plunge. A chance before the abyss. Time would tell if they would be able to salvage what they were losing without noticing. Or if they were about to become two strangers who once loved each other like no one else. That night, the cold wind rustled leaves across the silent street as Daniel parked his car in front of the restaurant. He didn't know exactly what had brought him there, perhaps an impulse, perhaps the need to understand why his heart had been beating at a strange rhythm ever since she said she would be at a business dinner. It was the same excuse she had been using for weeks, and although the words were always calm and convincing, there was something in her gaze, a short, almost imperceptible hesitation, that screamed otherwise. Daniel stayed in the car for a few minutes, observing the elegant facade, the yellowish lights reflecting on the windows, and the distant sound of a piano coming from inside. He took a deep breath, fighting the instinct to simply leave. But something made him leave, something he couldn't name, only felt, a pain that wanted to find its own origin. Inside, the atmosphere was welcoming, with tables arranged under dim lights and couples conversing in low tones. He walked with measured steps, his eyes scanning the space until they stopped, and everything that had been there before vanished. There she was. Emma. Red dress, restrained smile, eyes fixed on the man seated opposite her. There were no documents on the table, no computer, only 2 glasses of wine and an intimacy that hurt to watch. Daniel no longer heard the piano, nor the murmurs around him. The only sound left was that of his own heart breaking, piece by piece. He didn't approach, only observed for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Then, he turned and left, unnoticed, his face too serene for someone who had just lost everything. When she arrived home later, the silence was different. The air seemed heavier, denser, as if the atmosphere knew what she was still trying to hide. Daniel sat in the living room, staring into space, his coat still draped over his shoulders. She hesitated at the door, adjusted her hair, attempted a smile, and said softly that dinner had been productive. He looked up, and for a moment she felt stripped of all her lies. He replied calmly, "I hope you enjoyed it, because this will be your last dinner as my wife." The words came out firmly, without shouts, without tears, just the coldness of someone who finally understands that the trust is gone. She tried to approach him, saying he was mistaken, that it was all a misunderstanding, but his expression didn't change. "I saw, Emma. I saw you both." She stopped. Her name on his lips sounded different, as if it now carried the weight of a farewell. Her world crumbled in seconds. She tried to deny it, stammered, cried, held his face and begged him to listen, not to jump to conclusions. Daniel, however, didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't curse. His pain was more cruel than any fury. He simply stepped away, his eyes brimming with tears but firm, saying she could take all the time she wanted to sort things out, that she didn't need to explain the inexplicable. She pleaded with him to listen, but he only said, "I loved you with everything I had, and you chose someone who sees you as a pastime. That's not a mistake. It's a choice." After that, silence filled the house. The kind of silence that leaves no room for immediate forgiveness, only for the realization that love, sometimes, dies in silence. In the days that followed, Emma wandered through the rooms trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. She wrote letters she never delivered, sent messages that went unanswered. Daniel left without making a scene, taking nothing but his dignity. He moved to a small apartment near work, bought a used table, some plants, and began to rebuild something within himself. At first, everything seemed gray, without purpose, but little by little the routine brought some peace. He found pleasure in simple details, in classes, in books, in sunset walks. And, in the midst of this new cycle, chance introduced him to someone. A woman who didn't know him before, who didn't see him as the betrayed man, but simply as someone who knew how to listen and smile in a way that inspired confidence. She arrived calmly, as if she didn't want to fill a void, but to share her own space. And Daniel, for the first time in a long time, felt lightness. Meanwhile, Emma faced the echo of her own decisions. The lover, who at first seemed like an exciting escape, revealed himself to be indifferent and distant. The messages dwindled, the meetings became sporadic, and soon came the excuses. One night, after insisting they meet, she heard something from him that shattered what little pride remained. "You're incredible, Emma, but I don't want complications." It was good while it lasted. She tried to hide her despair behind a fake smile, but inside, everything screamed. She returned home and found the emptiness she had helped create. She slept hugging his pillow, now cold, mentally begging him to come back. But Daniel wouldn't return. Months passed. Regret became routine. She tried to re-establish contact, calling, sending long messages, writing emails confessing her mistake, asking for at least a conversation. On the other end, only silence. Daniel moved on, discreetly, without resentment, without anger, just distant. Until one night, while out with a friend to try to escape the weight of guilt, Emma saw him. He was in a small restaurant, playing the piano in a corner of the room. The music was soft, the same one he used to play for her on birthday nights, when they were still a couple. Next to him, a woman smiled. The kind of light smile that comes from someone who feels safe. Emma stood motionless, her heart racing, her eyes welling up. The melody, before them both, now belonged to another. She didn't have the courage to approach. She stood in the doorway, watching. He played as if at peace, his gaze shining in harmony with that of the woman beside him. For a moment, Emma imagined he might look in her direction, recognize her, feel something. But no. Daniel seemed to have forgotten her completely. It was as if she had never existed. And it was there, in that brightly lit restaurant, amidst laughter and soft piano notes, that Emma understood what she had truly lost. It wasn't just her husband. It was the man who loved her completely, the home they had built, the embrace that soothed her. She lost everything for something that didn't exist. Time seemed to stand still. She took a few steps back, her breath ragged, trying to hold back tears. One memory after another flooded her mind, the wedding, the promises, the plans. Everything now seemed distant, almost fictional. Emma left the restaurant before anyone noticed. She walked aimlessly along the sidewalk, her heels clicking against the ground in a hurried rhythm, the wind disheveling the hair she had so carefully styled. She cried until she lost her voice. That night, she understood the true meaning of loneliness, being surrounded by memories and not being able to return to any of them. Regret didn't come as an external punishment, but as a sentence that echoed within her with every beat of her heart. Meanwhile, Daniel was truly smiling again. The new woman in his life was helping him rediscover lightness, the pleasure of small things. She didn't talk about the past, didn't ask questions, she just looked at him tenderly and said that sometimes life breaks us only to teach us to rebuild with more awareness. He believed that. He learned to forgive, but not to forget. And when he remembered Emma, he no longer felt pain, only a serene detachment, like someone observing a closed chapter. Emma kept trying to pick herself up, but guilt followed her in every gesture, in every memory. Sometimes she would pass by the cafe where they met, sometimes she would walk the streets they frequented together, searching for any sign that she could start over. But nothing came. Fate had been merciless. Daniel had moved on, and all that remained for her was the emptiness left by her own choices. When she finally found the courage to write her last letter, she didn't ask for a reconciliation, nor for forgiveness. She wrote only, "You were the truest love I ever had, and I destroyed it. I hope you have found peace, because I am still trying." And she never sent it. She kept the letter in a box along with the wedding ring, the photos, and the last note he had left before departing. Years later, if they crossed paths on the street, perhaps they would exchange a glance, perhaps a brief smile, the kind of gesture that carries respect and melancholy. But their love, the one that seemed eternal, had turned into a memory. And, deep down, she knew that nothing she said or did would change what was broken. Some choices are irreversible, and the cruelest punishment is living to understand this too late. Time, for those who carry regret, is a prison without bars, and for Emma, the months that followed that night seemed to repeat themselves with the same pain, the same silence, and the same absence. His absence. Not of his body, but of the emotional presence that used to fill everything. The pillow beside her remained untouched, breakfast no longer made sense, and his clothes that still remained in a forgotten drawer carried a bittersweet smell of everything she had lost. She tried to immerse herself in work, filling her days with meetings, goals, and deadlines, trying to ignore the echo of the emptiness that screamed inside her home, but it was useless. The life she once had slipped through the cracks of her memory and was now just a distant recollection, and the worst part wasn't the longing, it was the awareness that everything was a consequence of a choice that could have been avoided. She didn't lose Daniel to another woman, she lost him to her own inability to understand the value of what she had before it was too late. For a long time, she nurtured the fantasy that he would return, that a chance encounter would reopen paths, that perhaps one day she would hear the doorbell ring and he would be there, with teary eyes and a sigh of forgiveness stuck in his throat. But that moment never came. Because Daniel had moved on firmly, without fanfare, without a soap opera scene. He started over with the maturity of someone who had suffered in silence, but didn't let the pain define him. He rebuilt himself with dignity, and more than that, he learned to protect his peace. The new relationship that emerged in his life was like a breeze after a hurricane, light and constant. The woman by his side didn't fill holes, she added to them. She didn't compete with the past, she simply walked with him in the present. And Daniel understood that true love is the kind that doesn't need to be fixed constantly, but rather cultivated with respect, every day. The reunion between Daniel and Emma happened 2 years later, by chance, at a book fair where he was giving a lecture on literature and emotional reconstruction. She didn't know he would be there, but as soon as she heard his voice on the microphone, her heart skipped a beat. She saw him on stage, smiling, confident, surrounded by people who admired him not only for his knowledge, but for the lightness with which he spoke of pain, overcoming adversity, and self-love. Emma remained at the back of the audience, motionless, her eyes fixed on the man who had once been the center of her life, and who was now a completely out-of-reach universe. When the lecture ended, he came down from the stage accompanied by his new partner. They were laughing at something simple, and Emma knew, at that moment, that she was no longer part of that world. She wanted to approach him, to say something, but there was no more room for words. Their story was over. And silence was the only possible ending. On the other side, Daniel didn't see her, or perhaps he sensed her, but chose not to look. He knew that seeing her now would be reopening doors that were already sealed. Not out of resentment, but for protection. He had learned the difference between forgiving and reliving. And he chose the forgiveness that liberates, not the one that binds. The woman beside him understood him with her gaze. She knew there were scars there, but she also knew he didn't live for them. He didn't talk about Emma. He didn't condemn her, nor did he refer to her as a villain. He only said that life had taught him to value what is true before it's too late. And that some pains weren't unfair, just necessary. Because they were what pushed him towards the most complete version of himself. Emma, for her part, spent years trying to rebuild herself. She dated a few times, but never managed to truly commit. The weight of guilt was a constant filter between her and the world. People approached her, but she could no longer trust herself. I was afraid of hurting, afraid of being hurt, afraid of trying and failing. Some friendships drifted apart over time, not out of judgment, but because she isolated herself. She maintained social smiles, occasional presence at events, but inside there was only silence. She continued writing letters to Daniel that she never sent, kept small objects from their life together, as if that were the only proof that it was real. And every night, before going to sleep, the last image she saw was him playing the piano for another woman, in the same place where he once swore she was the love of his life. Years passed, and life went on as it always does. Daniel remarried, adopted a daughter with his new wife, and built a quiet life, far from the spotlight of pain. Their home had the same kind of silence he had always sought, a silence of peace, not of absence. The mornings were filled with laughter, hot coffee, and weekend plans. He never forgot what he had experienced with Emma, but that was now a closed chapter, a part of the story that served to make him more aware of what he deserved. Emma finally found a way to move on. Not with the love of another, but with self-love. It took a long time, but she understood that sometimes it's not about regaining what was lost, but about understanding what led us to lose it. She began to write, not to publish, but to forgive herself. In each line, a piece of pain transformed into learning. And, little by little, she stopped waiting for the return of someone who no longer existed. She began to walk on her own 2 feet, without looking back at every corner. There were still days when she felt tightness in her chest, but now she could breathe. In the end, they each went their separate ways. Daniel rebuilt his life on the ruins of a love that couldn't resist temptation, but found, in the pain, the impetus to live something even more genuine. Emma paid the highest price of all, losing the love of her life by her own hand, and having to learn to live with the certainty that forgiveness, when it comes, doesn't always bring a second chance. And the man she so longed to return was now just a distant memory playing the piano for someone else. And you, who have made it this far, tell me, what did you think of this story? Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever known someone who lost everything because of a wrong choice? Write in the comments, we want to know your opinion. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share with anyone who needs to hear this story to the end. Remember, betrayal destroys. It corrodes what is most sacred between two people, trust. It not only separates couples, it erases futures, kills stories, and leaves scars that even time cannot completely heal. On this channel, no form of betrayal is supported, encouraged, or justified. Here, our stories are fiction, but the emotions are real. Because our purpose is to make it clear, with each narrative, that it is worthwhile to choose love, loyalty, and respect. Always.